Hello and welcome back to the Giant Pod. This is the first episode of Season 3. I just want to say a big thank you to everyone who's watched and streamed the Giant Pod Season 1 and 2 in the break while we've been away working on this one. It really does mean a lot to us. My guest this week is David Abram. He is an ex-travel writer, an ex-Radio 1 host. We talk about the travel industry, we talk about the travel media, we talk about my aspirations for hosting a travel documentary one day. We talk about being jaded with work. We talk about selling out in a way. We talk about integrity. We talk about his new project, which is Prehistoric British Monuments, which he takes photos of via drone at dawn. And we talk about a whole host of other interesting things. I really enjoyed this conversation. I think David had a really good time as well. So yeah, without further ado, here it is. This is the first episode of Season 3. Welcome back. It's good to be back. Here it is.
I used to be a presenter on Radio 1's travel show, and they used to send me off to random European cities for a weekend of revelry.
Right.
And I used to schlep around town trying to make friends with people with a microphone and record interviews with them, you know, conveying what a wonderful time. Yeah, exactly. Vox pops. And I'd go to nightclubs and have little adventures. Right. And I had a great adventure in Seville one weekend, and they were all very excited about the possibilities. And I got the thing back, I got a frantic phone call on Wednesday, the following Wednesday, saying the whole thing was completely dead because I hadn't switched a button on, or I had switched a button on that I shouldn't have done. And could I come down from Inverness where I was and re-record it? I couldn't. Right. So they had to all fake it in the office. I shouldn't be saying this, should I? They faked it on Radio 1, an entire inset where they just got the girls in the office to do the Vox Pops, putting on Spanish accents, and and the producer pretended to be me, getting all excited about, you know, what a fun time I was having. I mean, they just got loads of flamenco sound effects and whatnot, and just bodged it all together. And that was the end of my radio career.
So did they fire you after that?
Yeah.
Oh shit.
Yeah.
Was it like an unceremonious sacking, or was it?
No, just like the phone didn't ring, and then I got in touch. Where am I going next? And then I got a sort of politely informed that there wouldn't be any more. That's a bit unfair. I mean, I'd never had any training with this thing. In those days, they were quite big tape recorders.
Right.
And there was a little sort of mute button on the side, quite inconspicuous. And I nudged it, you know, to on, and nothing came out. Of course, I hadn't monitored my audio, as you're not doing now with headphones.
I'm being very naughty.
So, So I've been very worried since then. No, I didn't do any more. I did a bit of radio, but nothing more for them. That was great. I had such a good time, you know, because you could go anywhere. Having a microphone with those BBC things.
Yeah. Oh, it gives you some power, right?
Well, it would open doors. I mean, it got me into nightclubs I wouldn't have got into otherwise. And
what kind of nightclubs wouldn't you have got into? And why is that?
Any.
Because I know in Berlin there's that place called Berghain or whatever it's called, and they've got a very notorious bouncer there who's probably almost as famous as the club, I think. And if he thinks you're not cool, you don't get in.
Well, I wasn't cool by any means. I'm not now, and I certainly wasn't then anymore then. And I was on my own as well, a sort of burly Welsh bloke on his own, pitching up in the small hours. I mean, you know, you're not going to get let in. But I devised this tactic of, in a sort of the limbering up phase, as it were, in the sort of piazza, or I try and make as many friends of it as possible with my BBC microphone, and then I'd go in a group, and I'd look, you know. But just wave the microphone around, and it would open all sorts of doors. You get, you know, I just ended up speeding down motorways to the middle of nowhere. I didn't know where I was going off the time, what was going on, but I recorded it all, and then I used to make these programs from it that's made it sound like I'd had a wild old time.
That sounds like quite a good job. How did you land in that?
Well,
I say landing because I imagine it was, like most of these things, they were kind of a happy accident.
Well, Andy, that's exactly right. It was a happy accident. I was writing guidebooks at the time for Rough Guides back in the 90s and late 80s. No, early 90s. And I'd done one on India, and back when no one else had done. And so every time anything about India or tourism in India came on the radio or television, I'd get a buzz requesting me to come and talk about it. And a lot of opportunities arose from that, including this radio thing. I never said no to anything. I had a policy of never saying no to it. This is kind of continuing to this day, which is why I'm here now, talking to the bloke from the co-op. I just nipped in there to get a tin of beans, and next thing I know, I'm being roped into doing this. But I have a rule never to say no, which is probably why I was running out the door at the time that you started speaking to me.
Yeah. Well, this is the thing. I mean, I have a bit of a talent for sniffing out people that do like interesting things, right? I just get a sense of it.
Yeah, so it was going, so I think, bleep, frozen peas, bleep, beans. Are you right today, mate? Bleep, yeah, I'm fine. I'm thinking, it's the chatty tall guy, bleep, from the car. Bleep, down goes the pizza, and he goes, what do you think about the situation in the Middle East? And then the bleeping stopped, and of course, you had me at what? And Middle East, it was a clincher. So there I am 10 minutes later talking about Afghanistan. And next thing I know, I'm here in the town hall.
Yeah.
The wondrous, sumptuous confines of the town hall. So that's kind of how I got that radio job. And like a lot of things back then, if you can talk fluently and you've got a little bit of a profile, all sorts of great things can happen. In those days, it was a lot easier. You didn't have to go through sort of elaborate training, or probably would have helped if I had. But yeah, I spent the year, every month I'd go somewhere else. It was great, but it wasn't, and I did a similar thing in TV. I worked for the Sky Travel Channel for a while, but none of these things suited me because they were all very much skating over the surface of things, having a good time, inverted commas, when you probably weren't. It just felt like rubbish, really, and I'm much happier going in more depth into places. Like I'm a bit of a bookworm, and I'm much happier researching about places and going back to the same ones time and again. And this is what I used to do with my guidebooks.
Right. Did you find that the stuff they were asking you to do on Sky and whatnot was almost like a television equivalent of like a glossy brochure? That's
exactly what it was like.
Right.
They basically were just trying to give people ideas for things to do on cheeky weekends or their city breaks, and I never went on cheeky weekends or city breaks. It never interested me. It was a sort of contortion, really. I just having to squash myself in an odd shape, and I spent most of my life doing that, and to a degree. And I've always found the most fulfilling jobs are the ones where you have to squash yourself the least, as it were, where you're more sort of consistent or authentic with what you like. And but it's, as we was discussing just now before we came on air, it's actually really hard to find anything in life that allows you to be who you are and do what you want to do, isn't it? And to earn a bit of money to sustain you, which has always been my struggle, really. Yeah,
and I feel like this is what I've been trying to do my whole life, because from a very young age, I think it's like 3 years old, diagnosed with ADHD, and I probably don't have the most severe ADHD, but I've definitely got it. And I just knew there was I remember a moment in class when the teacher was like, so we're going to figure out what you want to be, and obviously you're in year 1 or something, no one's going to actually be what they said they're going to be. I'd be very surprised if someone who said they wanted to be a vet is a vet now. So, and all the kids were like, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to be that, I'm going to be that. And it was all quite sensible.
So what did you say?
Realistic. I was like, I had a whole list.
Oh, really? Like,
I was like, I'm going to be an actor.
And
if I'm not an actor, I'm going to be a wrestler. Had I known I was going to be 6 foot
What, were you already 6'9" then? No.
No, no, I was only 6 foot.
Were you the teenager? Were you 6 foot when everyone else was 4 foot? Back then?
Yeah, I mean, there was a period where I was like I was always the tallest in school.
Always. But you were the tallest baby in the creche, and
probably
right back when.
Probably.
Okay.
And then there was like a moment where I, felt like maybe I'd stopped growing at like 6'5", and then just went straight up to like 6'9" or whatever. So if I'd known then that I was going to be this big now, I would have pursued wrestling because I loved it as a kid.
And if your teacher had been told that you were going to be the mayor of Frome one day, would they have how would they reacted to it? They would have laughed. So.
Maybe, although I do remember some years later with this particular teacher sharing an
exotic cigarette. A moment behind the bike.
Sharing a moment.
Shocked me. A moment.
Talking about Led Zeppelin, sharing a moment while he enjoyed an exotic cigarette. And I think at some point I threw up in his rose bush.
Golly, that is an admission.
Something like that. So, but yeah, so who are these people to judge? It's what I fucking say. I won't. I was going to shout him out then. I'm just not going to do it.
Thank God you didn't, because the poor guy might try and hold on to his job or something. He would find that less easy if you...
I've had conversations with him since. He's actually a fellow ADHD.
I've always thought there's something wrong with most teachers. They were at my school.
Yeah.
Anyway,
I had a few good ones. I had a few that I didn't like, but yeah. So it's very very interesting. So I always kind of had this feeling like I'm a square peg in a round hole, and I'm not going to be able to fit into society, like, because I always felt a bit different. I always felt like I don't really fit into this world quite the way that everyone else seems to, like, out there and that hustle.
So the world of punk rock beckoned. Is that where you?
Yeah, I just felt like whatever I needed to do, it needed to be something that came from me. It needed to be something that came from within, and not something that's like pushing a pen or in an office or something kind of a bit straight like that, I guess.
But unfortunately, they're not often the things that pay the rent.
They're not, as I found.
Yeah. What with punk rock?
With punk rock, but the thing is, if it's a strange one. If you count the experience from being in Sick Ones, I'm a millionaire, but fiscally, financially, had made no money from it. But the experience and everything is just I wouldn't be able to trade it for anything. Can't buy it. Dreams came true.
That's it.
So it was lovely. But yeah, no, I definitely feel like it's kind of what we're doing here as well. I just always known that whatever I'm doing in life, it needs to be off my own back, and it needs to, like you said, real, authentic.
Yeah,
it needs to be you. It needs to be. Like, I always felt that my career or whatever I'm doing in life has to be part of who I am. Who I am has to be part of.
Rarely the case, isn't it? So rarely the case. But yeah, often you sacrifice financial security for that. It's definite trade-off, and you know, one has huge admiration for people that have managed to make a great success financially, not just financially, but to be able to build a life, you know, on doing what they really, really enjoy. It is the dream, isn't it? And it's, I guess right from the get-go, you know, from the time I left school, I always thought that at the very least I should be able to achieve that. And I did. I had a flying start. I managed to do that very well for the first sort of period of my adulthood, but it kind of bit the dust when children came along, but we might get to that point later, because of course that's the great leveler. And a lot of the things that you might have done that were really fulfilling and interesting and turned a little penny, you probably can't when you've got kids. You know, you're suddenly confronted with mundane realities. And since then, you know, it's been very, very difficult to sustain travel writing as a career, any sort of travel with anything really. But I kind of did. But hey,
because the nature of it is that you're away a lot, isn't it? And that's like,
yeah. Well, to start with, I was, because my first. So I should explain that I was thinking of getting a career, an academic career as an anthropologist, because I was really into the books of someone called Bruce Chatwin when I was a kid. I remember reading his stuff and all the books I read at university. I just thought, I've got to be a writer or something. And these books by this man, they seem to be so erudite and so inspiring in the way that they kind of synthesize disparate facts and travel experiences into something sort of coherent. I thought, that's what I want to do. I really didn't think too hard about how I was going to do it, but I went into this academic career as a sort of first step, and once I'd realised that wasn't going to be for me, my girlfriend saw an advert in The Guardian for back in the day. They wanted someone to write the Rough Guide to India. Right. And to cut a long story short, that's what I did, and it was a nightmare. The entire interview consisted of them trying to talk me out getting the job, because they felt that their integrity depended on them trying to get me not to do it, because it was such a turkey of a thing. They said to me, you know, you're not going to make any money. It's a long cut to a nervous breakdown. You'll be a basket case by the end of it, and you'll have no money and no friends, and you'll wonder why the hell you did it. And that all turned out to be absolutely true.
And why did they say this to you?
Because the books were produced on a shoestring. Right. By their nature, and so the advances were minimal. I mean, I was paid about £5,000 in advance, and I had to work for nearly 2 years, and I literally didn't have any money. I was just living on. It was ridiculous how broke I was. Right. But I was young and just managed to live cheaply. I think that there was 6 months of travel involved in that book, and then I worked for 18 months writing the book, and it did. I mean, I was reduced to an exhausted, gibbering heap at the end of it. The whole thing was so much pressure, but having done it. It opened lots of doors, you know. Right. I wrote other books that were more lucrative, much easier to do, regional books on India. Then I went on to write books about other countries in the world, and it added up to something like a career. Yeah. Certainly kept me busy, and it just paid my rent, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't really enough for a comfortable standard of living. So I started doing other things. I started taking photographs, and I became a bit of a photographer, and And then I tried to get a proper job using my skill set in journalism. And that worked for a while, and we had the financial crisis and all that unraveled.
2008?
Yeah, 2009, it completely, I had a really nice job. So having done, 15 odd years of writing guidebooks, I had about 20 books that I'd done. I started, I worked for a charity called the Ramblers that promote walking in Britain. And they got me to do a book that they were going to hand out every year to their entire membership of 120,000 people.
Right.
And the book was a selection of walks.
Right.
And I would write a sort of 4-page piece on each of the routes and what was of interest along them. Sounds a bit dull, but it probably was really, really dull actually to read. But my God, it was amazing fun to
put it together.
Research. Right. God, yeah, I went all over Britain on expenses doing these amazing walks, and that's kind of when I fell back in love with Britain. So yeah, and that unraveled. So I went back into guidebook writing again. By this time, it was really difficult. The digital revolution happened and book sales were plummeting. My royalty checks were diminishing every time. So I was always on the lookout for something else to do. And that's how I ended up drifting into... So at that point, I was still doing things that I really, really loved. I was still exploring. I was still writing about places I didn't know very well and was getting to know through the research and the writing. And I found it really inspiring. It really sort of fulfilled me. Didn't pay much money, but that was okay. Then the drift started as I started, after I had kids and I had a mortgage and I had to start thinking a bit more seriously. I started working more and more in the travel sector for companies that were sending people off on these sort of high-end package holidays. And that's where that was a thin end of a very unpleasant wedge where my working life kind of degenerated, and I started instead of being authentic, it became really inauthentic. It became marketing rather than reportage.
Right.
And I got really miserable. Did that until quite recently. I did it. It's lucrative. Never earned so much money, but I was starting to go mad, having to write puff pieces and.
What's a puff piece?
Well, just space filling thing really. That's full of cliches and. Instead of going out somewhere, finding something out someone needs to know and writing it up honestly, I was having to exaggerate, falsify, and downplay the downsides and really accentuate the positive. Marketing, really.
Yeah.
And I think the worst point came when we got this young marketing manager in who started getting me to write pieces based on keyword volumes and search terms. Oh. Right, she gave me this list of things. So I think the worst came last year in the height of lockdown.
What's a keyword volume? Is this stuff that people are searching for online?
Yeah, so it's a phrase that people have used a lot for search for things. So in the past, where I'd write a book of over 1,000 pages or contribute to books that were that involved going away for months on end. Yeah. By the end of my travel writing career, because we skipped all the bit in the middle, by the end of my travel writing career, I was writing ridiculous, pointless pieces of shoddy journalism based more on what I'd the second-hand, third-hand accounts that I'd found on Google and cobbled together than anything really meaningful, purely to attract traffic to that website. So the last article I ever did for that company before they sacked me in lockdown, because they I wasn't on furlough, I was a freelancer, was a piece on where to party New Year 2021. I mean, 2020, nobody was going to be partying. And I was saying, look, what's wrong with you? No one's going to be going out to Singapore to celebrate New Year this year. And she was going, oh yeah, but that was a really popular search term last year. And I was saying, yeah, well, it won't be this year, will it?
They're not searching for it this year?
No.
So they're not going to fucking find the article.
It was a complete waste of time. So I think at that point, I really did start to lose the will to live. And I think that's where we parted company.
So to be slightly pretentious, possibly. I don't know how seriously you take yourself as a writer.
Not very seriously.
Did you feel that when you were doing this, as you said, shoddy journalism, did you feel like you were sort of hemorrhaging integrity?
Hemorrhaging integrity. Yeah, that's one way of putting it.
Like
I know I did.
Selling out.
I completely, I totally had. And it makes me sound kind of pompous to say that it affected me. Because at the end of the day, it was still a really cushy job. But
it's an art form that you care about, isn't it?
There was something more profound than that. It was more than even it being a sort of ethical matter. There was something really unsustaining about it. When you've been somewhere real and you've had real experiences that you're drawing on to inform your writing, and the writing has a lot more credibility, but it also is more helpful, is more interesting, and crucially, when you're communing with all that stuff, all those memories, in order to write it, you're getting some sort of sense of light, some sort of space. You're sort of back there again, and that's what sustains you. When you start writing about places like I was having to do that you've never been to,
it's 2D.
Oh God, it's just crushing. And that process, that pendulum swing from one extreme, like literally getting on an aeroplane via Afghanistan in the 80s or wherever it was, out to obscure countries in Asia, trogging around on a shoestring, coming back with literally folders full of notes and bits of paper that I then had to sift through and extract the information from and put into a book form.
Yeah.
That kind of old school analog thing had loads of integrity. It was genuinely useful. It made lots of money. It was great fun. It fulfilled me. And then scroll forward 25 years, digital revolution, and then we're all just shuffling around words. And hardly anyone anymore is paid enough to actually justify them going places. So fewer and fewer people before COVID were really getting on planes. And the other big change in travel writing is that travel editors of newspapers these days, for example, have to hang everything they commission on posh hotels.
Right.
Which is all well and good if you're one of the sort of tiny percentile of people that can afford 400 quid a night to go to Crete on holiday, for example, in August. But if, like us, you're not, then, there's not a lot of point to it. And I'm certainly not one of those people that could afford that. So I was getting more and more disillusioned with it. So lockdown was a bit of a godsend, really.
And every aspiring writer has a thing where they say they've met someone that they admired and they gave them some sage words.
Yeah.
And those sage words are often write what you know, aren't they?
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
And you can't write what you know if you think they'll fucking send you there.
Yeah. Well, that's true, but look, it's the economics of it. So when we started writing rough guides, well, no, I wasn't even around at the beginning. When it started in the 80s, it was an even more basic thing. They were literally hitchhiking around Greece to start with. I came along a little bit later, but it was still a basic principle, very honest way of earning a living and truthful. And it's all about representing things as truthfully as possible, telling things like they were. You take that cog out of the machine, and the whole thing starts to become very, very difficult. And of course, it's a long way from what got me into it in the first place. So
it sounds a bit like that Jack Kerouac book where he's going across America, and it's that book about, I think that's his name, going across America, and the things that the experiences he encounters, the characters along the way. There's a romance to that sort of thing, isn't there? And I think that's kind of why I wanted to tour and stuff, because you have those that wealth of characters and experiences.
Yeah.
And what you were doing back in the day has that kind of, I feel there's a romance to it.
Well, I to be fair, it wasn't travel like I'd been doing before I was traveling professionally. The nature of it was different. It was much more enjoyable, actually, to have a purpose to every day, to have a long list of things you had to get around, because it would force you to do things you probably wouldn't have ever done otherwise. Yeah. And that's all sort of enriching. But having said that, I look back now, and when I find myself feeling a sense that there was a sense of romance about it, writing stuff that had never been written, writing about places that had never featured in any books, and going back to them over the years, year after year, by which time you'd have made friends locally, you would watch people's families grow up, you got to know the country much more deeply. There was a real romance about that. And you know what? I can't see any way, any vocation in the modern world that's an equivalent of that now. I mean, I can't imagine any project that would be viable that would allow people to go back, every 2 years. We were going every 2 years. To go back to the same places and to travel more deeply, and so you might not have been an expert when you started the book. You certainly were when you finished it, and then by the time you'd done 4, 5, 6 editions, you knew more about those countries than anybody probably. And there was that period when those books were authoritative. But that's the era of, and people are my age, and I'm in my mid-50s. We all remember traveling with these books, and we look back fondly because they were our like little Bibles. We've all got them on our bookshelves at home, to remind us of these great trips we had in Ethiopia or India or wherever it was. Now that's all gone. Lonely Planet books are sort of almost disposable if people bother with them at all. And there is a sort of romance to me now, looking back at it, that for a bygone era almost. I mean, it sounds like an old man, but it does feel that way.
Do you feel sort of sad for your kids that things aren't how they used to be, and that's a thing that they could probably not experience now? Or are they off doing other things?
That is a really good question, Andy. I know people say that, but it is a really good question because it's something that preoccupies me much more than you could imagine.
Right.
The way the world has changed, and it's not that I think it was better back then, but it's really, really changed, and I'm constantly trying to find ways of encouraging my children to engage the world that are going to yield comparable experiences.
Right.
So in my day, it was sufficient to get on a plane. Like, we met in the co-op talking about Afghanistan. I happened to mention to you that, you asked me what I thought of the situation. And I said to you, I've been there twice. And the first time I did it, I got on a plane in Heathrow, a Czech Airways flight, Delhi, thinking it was going to land in Delhi the next day. How wrong I was.
Where's Delhi? India?
Delhi's the capital of India, yeah. So the first stop was in Moscow, then it went to Kabul, and then it didn't go any further.
Oh.
And we were taken out of the airport for 24 hours and put on a flight and this was all sanctions busting. We didn't know. So that sort of stuff doesn't happen these days.
What's sanctions busting?
Well, because there was sanctions. It was during the Russian occupation of Afghanistan. So the national carrier of Afghanistan, Ariana Airways, was sanctioned. They weren't allowed to fly in and out of Heathrow. So they got around the sanctions by teaming up with another Eastern European. This was before the fall of the Berlin Wall.
Right.
The Eastern European airline, Czechoslovakia as it was then, was part of that, was behind what they called the Iron Curtain. Yeah. But they could fly to Heathrow, and they teamed up with the Afghan Airways, and that's how Afghan Airways got around it. But we didn't know that. We had a through ticket. That sort of stuff. I mean, I got to have a look at Afghanistan during the war, and the whole experience of travelling back in the 80s was super analog. I often tell people about, it's impossible to imagine how far away and out of touch with everyone you became. I mean, they didn't even have phones in India back in the 80s. You couldn't just go to a phone booth and call home. You had to. There was only about 4 cities in India where you could go to a telephone exchange and book a foreign call.
To book it,
you'd have to wait for hours and hours. Right. And if the phone was engaged, because we didn't have message machines back then, that's it. Right. You went to the back of the queue. So we didn't bother. You know what they used to do instead? Right. Was this thing called post restant, where you write to a person, you put care of post restant and the name of the city that they're likely to be at.
Yeah.
So I'd arrive in a city in India and I'd go to the post office and pick up a little pile of mail that had been written 3 months ago. And that was it. That was the sole communication that we had with our friends and family for months.
Sounds like effort.
It was an effort.
I probably wouldn't even bother. I'd just do my thing.
But the really weird thing was about it is that you felt so cut off from them, and that was the crucial thing. You were in a way that is unimaginable for people today who've got FaceTime in their pockets, and that's the big thing that's changed. So going back to the original question, I'm trying to find ways that my kids can get that sense of excitement and discovery, trying to help them, and it's all really about getting into nature, because it's only when you leave the roads and you leave cities and that you get that sense of exposure and isolation. It's only really being in the wilds that's still applicable, where you run out of signal or something. So that's what my life's morphed into now. I'm trying to find new ways of exploring the world that are more local, that don't involve getting on aeroplanes, and which give me that sense of excitement and discovery that I got from getting on airplanes years and years ago. Because me now, the last 10 years I've been getting on and off planes until quite recently with horrible regularity, and really not feeling like I'd ever left home particularly. I mean, going to India became just like it was an extension of this country. I didn't feel like I was going into a TARDIS like I did in the 80s and getting off in some exotic foreign land. It didn't.
So it lost its shine a little.
Yeah. So all that's sort of gone, and I don't think I ever will travel again very much.
There's an element of self-sufficiency, isn't there, that comes from that style of travel.
You develop it.
Where, and people joke, don't they, about people going to India to find themselves and stuff like that. And I guess there's a cliche sort of psychedelic Beatles-esque sort of.
Yeah, there is with India, yeah.
But there's something to be said for it, isn't there? Because if you've been living with your parents and you're 18 years old,
yeah,
and you go out into the world and there's no phones,
yeah,
who have you got? You,
yeah.
And something has to come from within you. Yeah. If something goes wrong, you deal with it.
I don't know if I was like that already or whether I became like that through those experiences. It's something I'll never be able to gauge for sure. I just know that as a kid, I was always quite adventurous. I always wanted to see what was beyond the hill or down the valley, and I always did do right from a very young age. But for sure, those sort of young, in my late teens, those experiences of being in Asia and cycling long distances and walking long distances, not having any money, having to really, really scrimp and eke out what small amounts you'd been able to save in order to stay away a long time, they really did make an imprint on me. And I think without those experiences, I probably wouldn't ever have allowed myself to get into the sort of kind of messed up state I am at the moment, where I'm, trying to make a living from art and photography, doing something that's never been done before. Not because I think it's necessarily going to be really successful, more out of some sort of inner compulsion. And this belief that, being able to do that, not getting over anxious about being stuck on my own somewhere, that's exactly the same as being 6 weeks walk into the Himalayas, knowing that if you get hepatitis, it's just you and the witch doctor sort of thing.
Wow.
Which well, this is the way it is when you walk for weeks, which is what I've, always most enjoyed about my travel experiences in Asia, is the walks, the getting away from the world.
Right.
Walking into remote parts of the world where people live in really traditional ways. That's always been the main incentive for me.
Fascinating. And were there, like you said, there were like books when you were a kid that inspired you. Were you inspired by any characters that were adventurers, Tintin or something?
Yeah, no, I wasn't. I grew up in Wales. We didn't have Tintin. I think it was the only part of the world that Tintin had not reached.
Damn. I feel bad for you.
So I didn't. It totally wasn't in my family until the age of 9. When my dad came home one day. My dad, right, who just worked in the local steelworks. He was a bit of a ne'er-do-well. Got expelled at the age of 15 and just went through the Air Force, got demobbed, got a series of crap jobs in South Wales. He came home one day and announced that he just landed this job as a sales manager for an American company in the Middle East. And we were basically, zapped, transported away at very short notice to Kuwait, as it transpired to be.
He just came home and announced that the family's moving to Kuwait.
He didn't even ask my mother about it. He just came home and said, "I've got this job. We're going." Can you imagine?
No.
My mother didn't stop crying for about 2 years. I mean, she hated it. But
did she have to wear a headdress?
No, it wasn't quite as bad as that. But she had to wear a headscarf in the market and stuff. But no, when it wasn't sort of oppressive, it was, well, for me, it was oppressive. She felt very oppressed by it. She hated living out there, and she didn't speak the language, and she missed her family, and she was disempowered. My dad had just made this decision on his own, and it did for their marriage ultimately. But for me, my God, it was like someone waving an incredible magic wand. I absolutely loved it from the minute I woke up there. The minute I pulled apart the curtains in the what was it called? The Sheraton Kuwait City. I remember looking out the back of this thing over a sandy car park to a sort of desert going on into the distance, and thinking, and hearing the car horns and watching someone in a dish dasher with a gutra, traditional Alcatraz walking past.
Right.
And just being absolutely amazed.
You woke up in another world.
Oh my God, that feeling of waking up in another world.
Yeah.
Like Doctor Who.
Yeah.
Or something. It was just totally
maybe Doctor
exciting.
Who's the hero.
Yeah, maybe that was that. I don't know what the archetype was. You know what? I don't think there was. I think more than anything else, looking back at my life, it was those experiences I had in the Middle East, properly exotic things. Like my dad had all these business associates that had falcons, for Christ's sake, and had horses, and used to go out into the desert and stay in these tents, drink whiskey and drum, and then get up early next morning at sunrise and fly their falcons. And
sounds like something I need
it was a dream, wasn't it? It was, and they had beach houses, and I'd only just learned to swim. I could float, I couldn't swim. Little boys, Welsh boys, are not.
So I'm imagining Kuwait as most people probably imagine Kuwait as a sort of place of war and stuff.
Yeah.
Well
before that.
What is this? Because I know Iran in the 70s hosted Frank Sinatra and the Rat Pack, and it was the place to be.
This was then. My dad was going to Tehran a lot. This is all prior to the Iranian Revolution.
Right.
The Iranian Revolution, I think, must have happened in 77, 78, something like that. Was that right? 79? It was before the revolution, before the Ayatollah, that era, before the Islamic Revolution. And Kuwait wasn't a place of war, far from it. It was a place of enormous optimism and dynamism. I mean, they were building a city out of nothing.
So it was like Dubai a little bit, was it?
Well, it was nowhere near that scale, and it was nowhere near as modern. And it was a huge. It sucked in refugees from all over the Middle East, people that were either stateless or or poor. There were a lot of Palestinians, there were a lot of Lebanese at the time. And they sort of, it attracted bakers and construction workers and taxi drivers and, anything that could be done to earn money that didn't involve owning land. So it was a boom town, and my dad was selling, what was it they were selling? Air conditioning.
Right. It's a place to do it.
Yeah, for a big multinational company. And expats had a good standard of living. So, and I had a very bizarre school experience, going to school with the local Palestinian kids. But the whole thing marked me so much. And it didn't feel so at the time. It just, you just eat what's put in front of you at that age, don't you, or not? But looking back now, I realised that it was that feeling that I got when I opened the curtain in that hotel and looked out across sand and odd light and seeing people where it just did something to me. It made me feel incredibly alive and excited. And all the subsequent experiences I had, travelling around with my dad, we used to go off to other places in the Gulf. I think it sowed the seeds for it. Right. And then, when I got to the age where I could travel on my own, the first thing I did was go back there and then on to India. And the whole experience of travelling when you're 18, back in the 80s, it was so massive. I mean, the minute you get out of the airport in these countries, it was just like entering another dimension. Right. By the time I'd done 6 months of travel in Asia at the age of 18, 19, I was never the same again. I was never going to be the same again. And I knew that whatever I did in my life had to have that in it. Yeah. I couldn't. So I tried to do a load. I worked in a supermarket like you. I pushed trolleys for months. I did all sorts of stuff and picked fruit and around France. Did loads of sort of manual jobs. Went through university, more manual jobs. Came out of university, did more difficult. But I always knew that somehow, somewhere, I had to get back to that. Yeah. Which is why I ended up doing what I did, I think.
Do you think have you recaptured that moment when you opened those curtains? Do you think you've chased that?
Not consciously.
No?
Not consciously, but it's definitely what compelled me. I mean, I know I can remember, for example, working in a furniture shop in Bath and coming out on my lunch break. This hell, you must experience it, when the monotony of standing at a till or stacking shelves and all that.
I had that recently. Yeah. I think maybe it's the day after I spoke to you.
Yeah.
I had a bit of I thought I was off and I wasn't, and they called me in.
Oh,
and I'd been in and I'd gone home and had a bacon butty.
Time stands still, doesn't it?
And then I got back in there and my soul was just decaying all day. I just fucking hated it.
It's terrible.
Hated
it. I remember that. I remember exactly, that feeling. And I came out of Habitat, as it was back then, in Bond Street in Bath. And I looked up and saw these clouds above the city, and they were like mountains. And I imagined they were the Himalayas. And I thought, I wonder how I'd feel if those were real mountains. And it was such a massive feeling. I just went back in and handed my notice in straight away. And no one talked to me for the next 4 weeks. No, literally nobody talked to me.
What, at work?
For 4 weeks while I worked out my notice.
Right. That is because they knew that you were going to go and do something that was leaving them behind.
Well, I don't know what they thought I was going to do, but I mean,
people get weird energy vampires.
Yeah, maybe that's what. Well, clearly it was weird, but I'll never forget that experience of working full time in a shop and how demoralised I was by it until that turnaround point when I decided, no, I'm going to bite the bullet, and I did buy a ticket. And this has all come about in a sort of ad hoc way, this story, but that's what led me on the plane in Afghanistan and in India, and I think I was responding to this feeling in me that I'd got in Kuwait, that I'd had in my life. It was an abstract. It didn't have a form. I just knew I wanted to go to other places, and I used to go to this little bookshop. This is where books really start coming to it, in my lunch hour, and I'd sit there every day for half an hour leafing through books by people like Raghubias Singh, who was a photographer who used to photograph India really beautifully, as it was back then, and it looked very different back then. And just dream of what it would be like to be, in a place that looked like that. Yeah. And when I did subsequently go to places like that, it felt absolutely every bit as amazing as I thought it would. It really, really did. And of course, that creates this sort of snowball thing in you when you want it. And I started being an anthropologist, which was amazing. I was getting to travel deeply. That was the first time that instead of going somewhere and moving around along a route, I started just being in one place for long periods of time. And I found that was the next step. That was the next revelation, was that, this is far more interesting, trying to work out what makes a place tick through learning the language and through asking people questions and through figuring it out. And then I realized, what's really interesting about travel is not looking at other landscapes, although that's lovely. It's trying to get inside people's mindsets and understanding their culture and like learning their language and what makes them tick. And so with the guidebooks that I used to write, really the most sustaining and inspiring part of it all was the studying and the learning and tying that in with your own experiences. That was so fulfilling because we used to have to write the history, you used to have to write about the literature, the music, you used to have to write the monuments, as well as where to eat and where to sleep and all that, and drawing maps. It was a lot to it. It was very, very multifaceted. And once you've done that for years, because it just turned into this never-ending merry-go-round of books, it becomes really difficult to contemplate
anything else.
A 9-to-5 sort of job. And I think now, I've reached this point in my life where I've kind of reconciled to the fact that I never will, even though I bloody hell should get off my arse and find one. I'm getting off my arse and doing everything I possibly can not to. In a nutshell.
I did a podcast with, it's a few podcasts ago, it's in season 2 now, with Jeremy Wade. Uh-huh. Have you met Jeremy yet from the River Monsters TV show?
Yeah. No, I saw him and thought, isn't that the guy that holds the big fish on TV? Yeah. He must have a similar sort of story, how he got into earning. I mean, that you earn quite good money in TV and it can be enough to sustain you, can't it?
He started out as a journalist.
Okay, about fishing.
I think so, bits and bobs like that. But what we were talking about, because I've thought about this earlier, and we're going back a step here, but I wanted to mention it, is that I was talking to him about how travel used to be in terms of like now, we'll land somewhere, we'll get Google up and we'll say, hey, Siri, where should I eat tonight?
Jesus Christ.
And Siri goes, here are a list of 5 restaurants near you.
It's crap, isn't it?
And then you just go to some shit.
Oh, God.
But I've never done any solo traveling, not like what you've been talking about.
Yeah, I used to have to go out and eat in all those places and talk to travellers, and you'd have
to find the place,
the
colloquial, what the locals.
Well, you'd have to find a knowledgeable local. This was the trick. You'd have to find someone who knew what you needed to know, and then they tell you, and you go around. Like in the evening, I typically go 4 or 5 places with somebody that I'd met, or someone I'd met. That had written to me or whatever, and that was always a challenge. Yeah, but it's quality control. You're actually doing it yourself, and when you buy a guidebook, when you bought a guidebook in those days, with the best of them, you were buying that. You were buying the benefit of someone's knowledge that had been out and done it, not like.
Well, you were buying something that that hotels had paid into, possibly. To be in?
No.
Is that a modern game?
Absolutely not. It's totally the opposite of that. This is what I'm saying, Andy. It was the complete opposite of that. It was up to you what went in the book, and you certainly wouldn't be swayed by someone offering you money. I mean, it did happen occasionally, but hotels didn't used to pay to be in the book. They would get in the book because they were good. After 2 or 3 days going around Bhopal or somewhere, or Ahmedabad or wherever it was, these were the places that I'd selected. That represented the best deals in each of the categories, going from 5-star right down to sort of hostels or whatever. And no, I mean, it was completely, what's the word? Honest. It was honest work.
Grassroots.
It was simple. And the idea now that your generation can... I remember the first time I saw a couple when I was in India. I was in sweaty Kerala one afternoon. It was absolutely sweltering hot. And this couple was standing, talking into their mobile phone, doing exactly what you've just described. Right. And I just wanted to say to them, what's wrong with you? It's all in here. Hand them my book. Yeah. But your generation doesn't think the same way. It doesn't sort of, why would you spend 20 quid on a guidebook to go somewhere when you've got all that information, or you think you've got all that information at your fingertips on your phone, I suppose?
Yeah, it's a like a crutch, isn't it? It's
well, a guidebook's a crutch. It's the ultimate crutch, I suppose.
But you've got to put some effort in with that, haven't you? To read a guidebook, you've got to buy it. You've got to. And there's a certain amount of mental investment.
Not much. I mean, if you pitched up in Frome, if I was going to do Frome, right? Typically, this is the sort of town I typically spend 24 hours in. I'd find a busy little pub that was sort of, and I'd go to some geezer like you, and I'd very quickly get a sense of whether if they knew their onions, and they'd tell me what the good pubs were.
Right.
And in Frome, that'd be what? The Three Swans, the Griffin, maybe the Wheatsheaf. You could cover them in half an hour, get a sense of what they were like. And you do the same with restaurants, and you talk to people and you find out what distinguishes the town. So what would you pick out of Frome? You'd draw people's attention to the market on, a cheap street and the architecture and a few sort of interesting, quirky things.
Yeah.
Job done.
But I usually just send everyone to Raves, the record store.
Raves, exactly.
Just go there, get in it.
Well, I'd be interested to see what was in the Rough Guide to England about Frome. But
it's all kinds of things now, isn't it? It's all hip and trendy.
That's what defines it. But I don't think this, to me, right, you cannot be a good guidebook, a book written by someone who either knows the place well and knows how to find out a place, really knows how to go about it. Because a book, it's a filtration process that goes on, and you don't want to know everything or anything. You want to know what you want to know.
Yeah.
And I don't honestly think the internet's necessarily an easy way to do that, because it takes you to opinion that is often biased. So if you had a Guardian article about this place, there'd be some sort of hidden agenda. Either it would be a hotel that is paying to be plugged, or it would be, whatever. There'd be a slant or a hook or an angle. Whereas we were just writing really, I think we all imagined that coming along behind us were busloads of people a bit like us that liked the same things we did, and that would want to know what we want to know. So we go off and find it. And it's really simple. I still think there's a place in the world for these things. And it's just sad that because the margins on them are so small, they're so difficult to turn a profit from those, even cheap books, because they cost such a lot to do. They've started to, that rough guides don't exist anymore, really. They sort of do, but they're completely impoverished now. They're not actually, they don't belong to the original owners, and they're not updated like we used to update them. Not even Lonely Planet can afford, the biggest guidebook company, not even they send people out,
right?
As frequently. More and more is done from back offices in Asia and this kind of thing. And it's sad, because I think it's hard to replace a really knowledgeable person that goes back year after year, and charts the changes. And so what I do, right, if I'm going to a new country these days that I haven't been to, I'll contact the old Rough Guide author that, specialised in that country, and I'll say, "Oh, Jim, so which was the best edition of Portugal that you ever did?" And they'll say, "Oh, yeah, it was a 250-page one before they cut, 80 pages out of it. that one was really, really good. You want edition 6. So I'd go and get edition 6, which might be 15 years old.
Yeah.
And it would have loads of what I really wanted from a guidebook in it, which is all the information about the sort of evergreen information, right?
What's evergreen information?
Evergreen information is stuff that doesn't date. So, the history, the culture, the background, all the stuff that's really hard to find out.
Monuments and things.
All that stuff. That's what I want a guidebook
Yeah.
for. I don't want a guidebook to tell me where the best booze are in town. Is you can find those things for yourself. That sort of stuff you can find out from TripAdvisor really, really easily. But people don't perceive, unfortunately, people used to buy guidebooks with that kind of information in mind. So as soon as the internet came along and offered that information for free, even though there's no triage process involved in TripAdvisor, it's all commercial and therefore easy to become biased, people still perceive less value in the guidebook because they can get the same what they think is the same information for free. And so guidebooks quickly became unviable. People stopped buying them as just odd numbers, so they weren't able to update them as frequently, and then the standard goes down, and sadly they're almost a bit of a sort of, I think their day has come and gone, really.
That's an interesting. There is a conversation there between value and meaning, isn't there?
How do you mean?
Well, the value of them in the eyes of the public has diminished.
The perceived value of, that's right. The perceived value of them is diminished. Yeah, that's true.
But there's meaning in there as well.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I travelled a lot in my life, in my younger days, without guidebooks, because there just weren't any to places like I went to, like West Africa. I remember going around with my girlfriend one year. My God, that was an incredibly tough trip. We had no idea we didn't know anything about anywhere, right. Not the practical level or the sort of cultural level. And then I remember coming back and 6 months later coming across the first Rough Guide to West Africa and reading about all the places we went to and thinking, oh my God, if we'd only known this, right, we'd have had a really good time.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. Back then, that made the difference between a sort of problematic and difficult trip and something that was a bit random and something that was probably, much more sort of fulfilling and enjoyable.
I have a bit of a thing about, I would like to host a travel documentary or something. I don't know why.
Like what?
I don't know why.
What would the focus be?
Well, I was gonna. What I would have done would have probably been Parts Unknown, Anthony Bourdain. I don't know if you've seen that. I was going to ask you what your favourite...
He's a chef, Anthony Bourdain.
Yeah, but his show is...
Oh, no. Where's it? Where's that show?
It's on Netflix.
Is it?
It's fucking incredible.
I have seen it pop up. Why is it amazing?
Because it's not just about food. He goes to these places, Parts Unknown. So he goes to places that aren't typically... touristy spots. Yeah, he gets into the local food, but he gives history, culture, and then he goes into a bit of the counterculture stuff. So he doesn't meet with all the people you'd expect him to meet. He meets with the local punk band, and he has dinner with them, and he asks them what's going on in the place that they're in, or what the meaning behind their lyrics are. And then there's a really arty, high production performance of.
And what sort of places do you know? Can you remember which places?
Oh, he goes to places in Asia. Libya is one of the early. After the what do you call it, revolution in Libya?
Arab Spring.
Yeah, and he's there at Gaddafi's palace. It's all rubble.
Yeah, that's the sort of stuff I'd really enjoy. Do you watch Simon Reeve's documentary on documentaries? Similar sort of thing, only they tend to be a little bit more sort of focused on social and political issues, but they're really brilliant.
He goes very political with things. Oh, it's a fucking amazing show.
Oh, that's good.
It's amazing. I think it's
so you'd like to do something like that with it?
I think so, or something like Idiot Abroad. I don't know. It just seems like a lark.
I'd commission you, mate.
Thank you.
I'd give it a punt.
It just seems like a good way to make some money and not...
Well, it's definitely not that.
A good way of not going to Co-op every day and still eating.
You're grasping at straws now, mate. You need more of a plan.
Yeah, I know.
Can't you steal food from that? Well, there's got to be another easier way. But you're going to give up the Co-op, is that right? Is this big news in Fruit?
No, it's not big. Well, it might be big news to some who like to come.
What are you going to do?
I'm going to be a learning support assistant.
Great.
Maybe I shouldn't name the school. I'm not sure if I should.
No need to.
For additional needs and stuff like that. And that's going to be a new interesting career thing. But yeah, no, there's always been a part of me that's wanted to host a documentary TV thing. And I'm thinking about it now. I'm thinking about it more. So I'm thinking about what's after the mayor, what's after being a town councillor.
Yeah.
The band is on a break right now, possibly to never return. So what's the next thing?
Oh, I think you should find a mate who's got a little, video camera, and you can borrow this external recorder there and go out and do it. Just go and, save up some money, go off somewhere and do exactly what you've envisaged for real and just film it and then come back and edit it up and then just knock on some doors.
Yeah, but this is the other thing. YouTube exists now.
Yeah, you can
if you've got the product, stick it on YouTube.
Yes, exactly.
The internet has done some weird things.
I think you'd be really good at that. I think you'd be really watchable and interesting because you've got this sort of humility about you, and you've got an inquisitive nature, and you're a giant as well. So you're gonna be welcomed with open arms, not literally perhaps, but people are gonna you'll stick out and in a good way, and people will be intrigued, and you'll find it easy to meet them like you do because you're quite extrovert. I think you'd be brilliant at it.
Thank you.
I'm not sure your taste in music is necessarily going to go down well in these obscure parts.
Well, I've got a very broad sense of what I like.
It's not just punk rock, then.
It's not just punk rock. No, I like loads of stuff. I listen to quite a lot of outlaw country at the moment.
What's that?
Stuff like Jason Isbell, a bit of Chris Stapleton, Tyler Childers.
Jesus, don't know any of these people are. Oh no!
Well, I'll send you some stuff.
I'm gonna have to listen to this podcast and write it all down.
They're all good. They're all very good. And I like jazz. All kinds.
What you could do a musical based thing, because not many. I mean, world music again. It's sort of my generation. It's kind of the whole idea of the other, of the foreign and the exotic, has kind of broken down over the last 30 years since world music became a big thing.
I've got a little real world collection going on as well.
But now, people are subject to influences from all over, aren't they? It's not, in those days, 30 years ago, there was sort of notions of, there were pure forms of traditional music that then became kind of cross-pollinated and diluted and mixed. Well, that process of cross-pollination is now occurring.
There was a big thing, wasn't there, in the 90s, I think, where a lot of the dance music was like, oh, let's take this hook from this Arabic traditional instrument or something, or let's take this Mongolian throat singing and put like a 4/4 club
or
bass
this
on it.
pygmy singing, and let's put some synthesizer beats underneath it, and deep forest style. And I mean, these things worked. Nowadays, I don't think other cultures' music is perceived in the same way, but it's so evolving so fast, music, that I never find it dull when I stumble upon something on TV or radio that where someone is talking about a musical genre or a tradition in some bit of the world I know very well, because it sort of gets under the skin of the place really like nothing else. You wouldn't do that.
This is the thing that I was saying with Bourdain, the Parts Unknown. I think it's been done. I think the Ultimate Travel Show.
Not been done by you though.
Not by me, but I think he did it. I think he you need to see some of this. It's just the way it's put together, like you said, getting under the skin of the place. He gets under the skin of the place. He gets in there.
But I really like the idea of somebody doing it on a very low budget for real, real travelling on really, on a real shoestring, because that is not the case with Bourdain. He certainly would have had a Netflix budget to do it. You go off somewhere.
Oh, he had CNN money.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
That is going to skew things. Why don't you just sort of go off and do something somewhere when this whole COVID business has sort of calmed down a bit, and go and do something that follows your interests around and stick it on YouTube?
I'd need a very eccentric, wealthy friend who just chucks a check at me and says, go and see how it comes out. I don't need this money back, but go and see how it happens. Just go and see what you make.
So the money's the issue, just being able to save money in order to get the free time
I can
off.
present it. I can find the crew to do it.
It's just the dosh.
It would just be the dosh. That would be nice. That would be the ultimate thing. Is if someone went, here's 10 grand.
Yeah.
Go and make this product with some of your talented mates.
Yeah.
Of which I'm blessed to have many. And I don't need the money back, but try and get it back.
Well,
at the end of the day, but that doesn't happen anymore. It's not like it used to be back in the day. Like, you hear about
crowdfunding.
There is, but there's something, I don't know. I feel like coming out of COVID and everything, we're going to hit a financial crash. I feel like something like me going, hey, everyone, I need you to put your hands in your pocket so I can go off and go on a fucking jolly.
I don't think you really don't look at it that way. Well, listen to this funny story that might encourage you to look at it differently, crowdfunding. So to sort of bring the story, my funny little career story up to date, after it had all unraveled and I ended up in the commercial sector doing pretty miserable bullshit writing, really. And I lost my job then in the COVID because all the countries that I wrote about were all in Asia, and all the companies that I worked for were out of business, going out of business, or they were all, repaying deposits, not getting any bookings. That's still the case, by the way, in September 21, August 21. So I lost my job last June 2020, and I didn't know what the hell to do. What was I going to do? I got the government self-employment support grant through, and a bit of money from Mendip because I had a studio, enough to just keep me in mushy peas. And I thought, what am I going to do? So I did two things. One, I started going out more with my drone, taking pictures of ancient monuments, which is this weird hobby that I've been doing.
But you're turning that into
The second thing was I went and got a book deal. And book deals these days are rubbish, right? Because books don't earn money thanks to Amazon. The basic problem is that Amazon demands such huge discounts compared to booksellers in the past that there isn't the money there anymore coming to the publishers to afford to pay the authors more than a nominal amount of money. So the amount of money I got in advance was not enough for me to do the job, which was to cover the rest of Britain. So at some point or another, when I was really running out of money, I set up a crowdfunding scheme which was driven by Instagram, because by this time I'd built up a bit of a following on Instagram.
Yeah, you've got a good following on Instagram. How did you do that?
Well, I think just sticking at it. It resonates with people what I do, because I take pictures of prehistoric sites, often in parts of the sort of around here, for example, that people don't even know they exist. When they see them from the air, and they realise what extraordinary places they are, it inspires them, makes them feel like a sense of connection with the past. So I think that has caused the snowball on Instagram. But I used my following on Instagram to direct people to this crowdfunder, and I was able to raise enough money to finish the book. I was able to raise considerably more than I'd been paid in advance by my publisher.
Right.
And
how much was that? Can I ask?
Well, I think I raised over 15 grand.
What?
Yeah, crowdfunding.
Wow.
Well, look,
And there's no stipulation with that. They're like, have this, do what you need to do with it. If that's going to go towards
no, I mean,
mushy peas or whatever, then do it. Like,
no, I mean, it's really clear about what I was going to do with the money. I mean, half of it, more than half, 60% of it spoken for fulfillment. So a huge chunk I have to use to buy the books. I should point out that it was pinned to a pre-order thing, right? In order to capture sales, in order to get a decent amount of money from my book, I became my own retailer in advance, so that Amazon couldn't capture those sales. I got in there first, got 250 orders, and also so I couldn't take orders from abroad because the fulfillment's too expensive post. So a lot of people gave me money. I think more than 50 people made donations, just as they wanted me to continue, because they've been following me on Instagram. They wanted me to continue with my kind of journey, and because they were enjoying the feed. And I was saying, well, look, I literally can't carry on doing it. I can't get to Scotland. I haven't got the petrol money to get up there and back, to continue the work. And by this time, a lot of people have been following me for 2 years, and they were really keen to help. And I raised 15 grand, more than half of it spoken for, but the rest of it is all going to enable me to push my project forward. And I've nearly done it now. I've only got 2 more locations in Britain to photograph.
And what are they?
The Orkney Islands, and then some of the parts of of Lewis and Harris, the Outer Hebrides. There is some really.
Where's the Orkney Islands?
Off the top right-hand corner of Scotland.
Okay.
And the Hebrides, Lewis and Harris, are off the top left-hand corner.
So will you do those at the same time?
No, I won't do them at the same time. See, the thing about my photography, it requires very particular weather conditions for it to work.
Right.
So I use shadows, very important in my work. If you look on www.davidabram.co.uk, Abram, that's my website, you'll see these pictures really depend on, they're all taken at sunrise, sometimes sunset, but mostly at sunrise, on cloudless days.
Right.
So the light's really pretty and accentuates the contours of the sites and enables you to see the work that was done, thousands of years ago in the earth. So I can't, you don't get I've been waiting for 6 weeks, 5 weeks for a decent spell of weather. As soon as it comes, I'll get in my van. I got a van that goes, that I kip in now as part of this project. The crowdfunding enabled me to do that. So I drive, up the M6 all night, pitch up somewhere in a remote bit of Scotland for sunrise, or I sleep there. It's often the case as well. I'll go up, and if it's a long walk involved, 2 or 3 hours walk to one of these remote stone circles or burial sites, I'll sleep on it.
Right.
And I'll be there in place when the sun comes up, and often for sort of half an hour you get this magical light. It all looks really beautiful. Put a drone in the sky, click, and then I get in the van, drive home, because you can only do it when the weather's nice. Yeah. So I've done 4 trips to the Highlands already since June. I've got another 2 left, and then it'll be done. And now crowdfunding's enabled me to do that.
Right.
I'm sure a lot of people in Frome that follow your podcast would be willing to pitch in. I certainly would. You don't have to ask for much money. You can crowdfunding is great. You can give people all sorts of levels of options depending on, like you could offer what fun. You could offer a dinner with Andy, or an hour's chat with you see.
Right.
And for 50 quid or something. Well, you never know.
Big thank you to my guest this week, David Abram. We are going to leave links to all of his projects, rough guides, and his drone photography, his Instagram, etc. in the show notes descriptions. If you could please leave a like, subscribe, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, that would be really, really great. That really, really helps us out. It's a great way to support this podcast without putting your hand in your pocket. If you want to follow The Giant Pod on social media, you can. It is at The Giant Pod on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want to follow me and everything I get up to in life, you can follow me on Instagram at Andy_TGP. This podcast was produced by the most travelled man I know, Harry Williams. Thank you so much for tuning in to the first episode of Season 3. We love doing this, and we hope that you guys love listening to it. We'll be back very soon with another episode. Thank you very much. Ciao. Bye. Catch you. Sayonara.